All right, let's call to order this Issaquah City Council Committee of the Whole meeting on Tuesday, March 25th. We have three major items on the agenda, starting with numerous presentations from members of the city staff pertaining to our council effort on city goals, followed up by an item regarding the Klahani annexation, and then those are the really two main ones, and an opportunity for all of us on the council to give our regional report, something we are doing during regular council meetings, so this would just be an update. So we're going to start with the council goals. Now there's an order in the agenda. It's emerging issues, then the Economic Vitality Commission's SWOT analysis, followed by the 2013 city goal updates, followed by the 2013 fourth quarter year-end report. And we're going to switch the order a little bit. And Diane, hopefully you don't mind. We're going to ask, are you going to be giving the financial update? So let's start with that and follow that with.
We'll do 2013 goals.
Yeah, we're gonna go from the bottom up.
Yes.
So we're going to go DCBA. Sorry for members of the public who showed up and really wanted emerging issues first. Thank you, Diane.
So, good evening. I'm Diane Marcotte, the Finance Director for the City of Issaquah. Tonight we are doing a summary of our 2013 activity and focusing in on a couple of our major funds. Included in the handout for tonight is a more detailed explanation of what happened during 2013, and tomorrow it would be available up on the city's website after the conclusion of tonight's meeting. But for tonight, we're going to be talking about how we did in 2013, particularly in the general fund and our utilities. What this report is really a comparison of budget versus actual expenditures. This is not a discussion on the city's official financial statements. We're in the process of, we're nearly completing those. If you recall, in June of last year, we spent a lot of time going through the various funds and all of the financial operations, and that is what we call GAAP basis, generally accepted accounting principles, and that basis of accounting is different than the presentation tonight. So tonight basically is talking about how the money came in 2013 and how we spent the money without all of the compliance and technical requirements that are required in our accounting profession. So starting out, how did we do? So in the general fund, we ended revenues being about 2.2% lower than budgeted. And that was primarily due to several revenue categories that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. And then our general fund expenditures ended up being 3.5% lower than budgeted. So in the general fund, when we take all of our various departments from the city council department to development services to ED and police, we ended up underspending by 3.5%. The ending cash reserve ended at $8,059,000. What we did do is, you'll see later on, we had to use around $200,000 of last year's ending fund balance or this year's beginning fund balance in order to balance out operations. The budget had originally contemplating using $1 million. So we did extremely well when you look at the overall big picture. The council adopted a goal last fall that our targeted reserve for the general fund was 15%. And as you can see in the last bullet, we ended up being, where the coverage ratio for 2013 is 24% of expenditures. So we've well exceeded the council goal that you adopted last year. General fund revenues, you can see the actual comparison. We received $34.3 million. Our budget was $35 million. expenditures were 34.5 and anticipated was 35.7. So in relationship, you can see that we, overall revenues and expenditures, being off by 2 or 3% in a $35 million budget is very good. If it was a 10% variance, we would be having more of a conversation. What happened was we saw a significant boost in retail sales. One of the things is really interesting when you look at 2012 actuals compared to 2013, about that time the economy really began to pick up and we saw a lot of construction work. So while we met our sales tax projection, what's really important to note is that between 2012 and 2013, our sales tax grew nearly 13%. So you can really tell that in the city of Issaquah, we definitely came out of the recession and we saw a tremendous improvement in our retail sales. Conversely, we saw a slight overall increase in our B&O tax because it represents a lower percentage. The variance or the increase is much smaller. Our municipal court revenue, we continue to see since 2010 a decrease in the revenues. Part of the reason we didn't hit our revenue target in part was because of revenues, and I think when you look at what we budgeted in 2013, it was more reflective of revenues that we saw in 2010 and 2011. For the 2014 budget, we did a realignment that we believe is more realistic based upon what we've actually been seeing for revenues coming in over the last several years. Building permit revenue.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Diane. Question, Josh?
Yeah, I just had a question on that last slide. What in your estimation explains this? Is it fewer filings? Is it less compliance with payment of fines? What's driving down the court revenue?
My understanding of it is, in 2010, what you saw was a lot more revenue associated with traffic infractions or parking infractions. What has happened is there's a lot more emphasis in more severe type crimes that take longer to process and involve less, they're not as easy to collect the revenue. I don't know if the chief has anything. Okay.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I can tell you that what we did do was we have the camera up at the school, and we're also beginning to see some decline in that revenue. So it's sort of the good news, the bad news is we're seeing less revenue because we're having greater compliance. So ultimately in the end game, that is what we wanted, but the result is that we're seeing less revenue in that category also. Building permit revenue was 7% higher than budgeted. We had some conversations during the development of the 2014 budget. Some of this revenue that we see coming in, a lot of the spike, some of it came in towards the end of the year. So really what happens is we bring that revenue in and the associated expenditures we see in 2014. There is a lag between when we actually collect the revenue versus when we issue the permit. So we collect it up front, do the work, and then issue the permit. So over time, we really look long-term and look at it as far as a smoothing. What does it look like over the last 4 or 5 years versus a snapshot in time? Other major sources of revenue are our property taxes, and here you can see we came in a little bit under what we had budgeted. That's pretty typical. We actually are about 98% of our collections overall when you look at year over year, so we really have a low rate of delinquency on property taxes and then maybe properties going into foreclosure. Our utility taxes were up higher than what we had anticipated. When you look at our water revenue coming up, you'll see that our revenue for our water utility came in. So some of that is, when you look at that, and then when you look at that and compare it to PSE, which is one of our primary taxpayers there, you can sort of see the correlation between the weather and the revenue. So we sort of, a lot of it is weather dependent. Jail services, towards the end of the year, we saw an increase, and a lot of it was as a result of some changes in Snohomish County. So towards the end of the year, revenue, we were averaging around 66 prisoners. Yeah, so we've been seeing an increase, and we anticipate that increase to carry forward into 2014. And then recreation and pool fees, those came in a little bit under budget also. This is just a comparison over 4 years, and you can see the largest change is in our sales tax, but pretty much all of our other revenue streams are pretty much hitting the target. You know, like we talked about earlier, the court revenue is down. When I started going back in and analyzing a lot of our budgeted revenue, once again, when you looked at what we budgeted for revenue in the general fund, they were more reflective of money that we saw coming in 2010 and 2011. And then when we built the 2014 budget based on the revenue side, I really adjusted those. And that then brought in a lot of the conversation we had in the development of the 2014 budget, where we had to come back with some additional new revenue streams as well as reductions in expenditures. So I feel like our revenues have been kind of tested and readjusted based upon what we really historically have been seeing in the past. So on the expenditure side, how did departments perform? So overall, we came in at 3.5% under budget. Some of the major categories in the finance department, the reason, while the delta isn't all that large, it's about $70,000. Part of that was a payout of one of our senior employees in the department. In the legal department, it is really based upon, they just simply bill us for the time. We have been working with the departments to educate them to ways to do some of their own research, giving them more tools where using, like, for instance, MSRC as the first line of defense to do research instead of always calling our outside legal counsel. Human resources, what we did there was, it wasn't necessarily a savings, but a reallocation. And historically in the past, we had some general citywide benefits, and they were all charged out of the Human Resources Department. During 2013, what we began to do was actually charge the applicable departments and the applicable funds for their portion of that cost. So instead of just being lumped into Human Resources, it's been reallocated where it's more appropriate. And then information technology, the change was that we had a vacancy in that position, and we held that position vacant through the end of the year. Economic development, they had some of the larger savings because they had a position that was vacant for a good portion of the year. And then the last one is we had some savings in our other governmental services. That one, other governmental is a department where it really isn't tied to a specific activity. So sometimes there's variance in how we spend that money. So that's sort of a big picture summary of how we spent our money. Most of the departments do a very good job of managing their resources. They provide us information when they think they're having some problems, and we do a lot of problem solving to make sure that overall we can manage the city's budget. Just a summary, once again, finance department was our senior employee who retired. Also in legal fees, we did some of this is offset by revenue, but we did some changes in our services for public defense and prosecution. We entered into a relationship with Snohomish, the city of Snohomish, and then we pay the bill and then they pay us back. Human resources is our HRA account. Information technology is both a vacancy and a transfer of an employee to Public Works. Economic development, some of the change year over year was 2013 was their first full year. 2014, their budget is reflective of their actual expenditures. And then other governmental services is a reduction in operating transfers. So our utilities, on the revenue side, 2013, you can see that our water revenue was up substantially, our sewer revenue did not meet our target, and our storm was right on target. And once again, when we went back and analyzed, our consumption for water was up, so the corresponding revenue increase made sense when we looked at the water revenue. So this sewer revenue, the majority of the revenue that comes in is really a pass-through to King County Metro. Our portion of the actual sewer utility revenue is very small. And then on the stormwater, you can just see the gradual increase. We've not had a rate increase for several years, and so the actual increase in revenue is just simply due to new customers being added. On the expenditure side, all three of the funds came in under budget as far as operations. Some of that was due to vacancies in PWO. They held some positions open for a while, and just underspending in supplies and other line items. And just a 3-year comparison of operating expenditures. You can see in the water utility there has been some consistency between 2012 and 2013. Their operations, we haven't added any additional staff. We've added a little bit of additional money for some repairs and maintenance. Again, in the sewer utility, the primary change between 2012 and 2013 is our increase in fees that are passed through to Metro, because we did not do a rate increase in any of our 3 utilities in 2013 as well as 2012. And then in the stormwater, once again, that is just the relationship of as we grow, as we take on more obligations, then we have more expenses related with managing our stormwater utility. And then a little bit, what's ahead for 2014? We are very optimistic about our sales tax. We've seen our January and February numbers. They're looking good. They're looking strong. So we're hoping that trend will continue throughout the year. Included in the detailed presentation is a breakdown of sales tax between our 2 largest categories, which is retail sales tax and then sales tax on construction. That sales tax on construction for 2013 as well as 2014 is up. Just as a reminder, sales tax on construction, we typically say it's one-time money. It isn't like a retail business that is bricks and mortar and is here to stay. It's really dependent upon the economy and what's happening in the development arena. Building activity, as we talked about, continues to be very strong. The Development Services Department has been very busy, and Economic Development has been working in partnership with them to make sure they have a lot of work to do. Healthcare, we will be reporting out to the council by June. In 2013, we went self-insured. At the end of this month, we will be working with our broker to get a summary of 2013 activity, and then we'll bring it forward to council to let you know how we did throughout 2013. 2014, we made some changes to our program, so we went truly, what happened in 2013 was we sort of used a composite rate, and we simply paid our Premier our composite rate. In 2014, we truly went self-insured. So every time someone goes to the doctor, puts in a claim, in a particular week, we pay that claim. So we're truly self-insured in 2014 as compared to 2013. And then currently in Services and Safety is a budget amendment for 2014 that will be coming forward to council on April the 21st. That will just be bringing us up to date. But overall, in all of our funds, just sort of to summarize, there isn't anything unusual. All of our activity came in as we had anticipated. None of our funds exceeded the appropriations. That will be good when our auditor comes in. It's one of those compliance tests that they do when they walk in the door to make sure that none of our expenditures exceeded our budget. So with that, this is really an abbreviated presentation, and as I indicated, there is more information in the 2013 year-end financial status report. That's it.
Thank you, Diane. Any members of the council have questions for Diane? Next up, City Administrator Bob Harrison is going to give us an update on our 2013 goals.
Thanks. So the great thing about doing this update in March is we got an extra 3 months before we had to come talk to you. And so several of these items you'll see as we go through them briefly actually kind of got accomplished here in this final quarter. So the first item that was a council goal was the Klahani PAA. And so council had 3 items on this issue. First was to perform the Klahani annexation study, and we completed that last year. Allocate the funds in 2012, determine direction, and council action by 2013. So as you know, we went to the BRB, we got that approved, finished the study, actually had an election in February, and the results ended up being slightly below 50% for approval of the annexation, slightly above no. And so it's going to be one of the issues we're going to be talking about tonight is kind of the results of that. And so for the most part, that goal got finished in terms of what the goal actually was for 2013. The skate park goal was relocate and or enhance the skateboard park based on the school district plans and community input. And the recreation department's been leading a fairly significant effort with public meetings. Council allocated $350,000 in the 2014 budget for the building a new park, and that includes the demolition of the old park. And the Recreation Commission has made a recommendation, which came to the mayor's office today. And so we anticipate that'll be coming to council in April for an actual location, which is at Tibbetts. So you'll be seeing that recommendation coming to council and then being referred to the appropriate committee for review. As you know, we actually got this done in 2012. We hired a lobbyist, and Doug Levy has been doing a lot of work. You've been getting his regular written reports on the impact of the legislature. As you know, we got $5 million in the last capital budget that came, that was actually approved by the state. Not as much success this time because there ended up being no capital budget that was approved down in Olympia. But the nice thing was Lake Sammamish State Park, which had been allocated for a $600,000 cut because there was no capital budget, ended up remaining at the appropriate allocation of $2.9 million. So we actually won for losing in that case when it didn't get approved. Doug is going to be coming to council to brief you on the legislative agenda and the last session that occurred at the first meeting in April. So he'll be here for about a 10 to 15 minute presentation that you'll be able to give him, get an update and ask him some questions at that time. The IPZ zone, Innovative Partnership Zone, and SWOT analysis, this was really being done by the Economic Development Department. And so the Economic Vitality Commission did spend a lot of time in 2013 actually completing the SWOT analysis. A big part of that, though, that will be helping to feed that, and you're going to hear a presentation on this tonight, is the sector analysis, which is kind of the next step that will help fill in some of the blanks for them, particularly as it relates to the Innovative Partnership Zone. And the IPZ is a technical designation from the state, which provides some, I think, some grants and some,
It used to have money, but there's no allocation.
No money
from the
anymore.
legislature anymore, but still the kind of the notoriety and the marketing has value.
Okay, that's good, and I'm sure you may talk about that a little more in the next presentation, Keith. So this is kind of really an ongoing goal. The IPZ is really designed to help identify those sectors in our local economy that have interrelationships that we'll be able to build upon. So you think of the city of Bothell, they've really developed an innovation partnership zone around life sciences, and they have several life sciences types of businesses that exist in that community. And so this sector analysis that we've been spending quite a bit of time talking about will help to identify several of, our kind of incubator businesses that will be, we would anticipate developing in the future. Televised city council budget meetings. We did that last year. Done. And I think what I heard from the council was they liked it. I think it kind of turned out okay. Develop a plan to improve traffic intersections, specifically at Front and Gilman and Front and Sunset. And Front and Gilman, related to that goal, was a high priority. Front and Sunset was a lower priority of the two. And the real start to that, as we went through, was how it interrelates to the I-90 interchange. And so we've been working with our lobbyists to get an interchange justification report funded. It's about $2.1 million in the state transportation budget, which Olympia decided not to approve this year. But that would really begin the whole analysis. So that includes the overcrossing, which we were looking at on 12th to connect across the interstate, as well as how the interstate works at Front and 90. And so it's the start to potentially making future improvements to the interchange. And so getting that $2.1 million is going to be fairly significant, but it would, if the council decided in its goal-setting session later to carry this over, it's really going to be a multi-year process. It's not something that's done. Develop a strategy for Route 200.
Excuse me, Bob.
Bob, just a quick question back when you were talking in regards to your last slide about the justification, the interstate justification. Does that then give us more of an opportunity to get funding and grant dollars? Or is this just sort of the we need to know where we're at basis and what needs to be done?
Yes, so to get a project funded through federal grants, which was usually like an 80-20 split between the state and the feds, requires interchange justification reports. So if you're going to do anything to an interchange, you have to kind of start there. That's the basis. It's an initial analysis to determine what the current state is, and then based on that, they could make future allocations to the project.
Okay, thank you.
So we have been obviously monitoring this, Route 200, Route 928, and we have a transportation mobility team made up of several of our staff, and it's cross-departmental, and working closely with Metro as there's a vote scheduled on this coming up later this year, which King County has put forth their Plan B, if I remember correctly, in terms of the plan. And if that does pass, that will provide funding and for several of the transit routes. Still to be determined is the impact on 200 and 928, because they are, unfortunately, two of the lowest ridership routes that Metro maintains. So obviously we're concerned about the maintenance of those routes, and if the funding for those are cut, we're going to have to do some additional analysis of how we kind of go forward. The citywide bike and pedestrian plan, we went through a significant process last year, very open and public. We have a draft plan done, and that's actually going to be submitted to council by mid-year. And we also purchased several bike racks, which are going to be installed at various locations in the city in this upcoming year. But I think the biggest thing will be this overall mobility report on the bike and ped plan that I presented to council here probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks is what we would anticipate. Becoming a 5-star city, and the council member who proposed that is now the mayor. And I think what it really is kind of an ongoing initiative of the mayor, and his intent was that it's really a philosophical goal of service, infrastructure maintenance and improvements, and democratic values that are reflected in our everyday work. So it's really hard to pinpoint one thing specifically that you would say, that's 5-star service, but I think it's the concept of how we operate as a city that the mayor has been trying to incorporate in his short administration. And even some of the staff that are here may have gotten some emails from him which has 5 stars after it when he recognizes some service. That's just continue to incorporate that concept and reinforce the idea. Fireworks in July 2013, well, we all know how that worked out. We didn't have any fireworks last year. So you may recall in the 2012 budget, we actually ended up not funding the fireworks for 2013. One of the items, I guess, on the second bullet that I'll just touch on is that council at that time was concerned whether or not individuals could do a private fireworks show if there was a neighborhood association or an organization that wanted to hold that. And there is a provision in our code that would allow for a special event permit to be pulled and a private organization to actually hold a fireworks show if they chose to. Lake Sammamish State Park, this has been an ongoing process with the state. One, we secured funding for the beach restoration boardwalk and bathhouse, which I talked about earlier, $2.9 million, and they're anticipating that project's going to go forward here this year. They've actually submitted a letter to the city requesting annexation of the state park into the city of Issaquah. And working with our economic development department, the state issued a request for conceptual proposals on potential partnerships between organizations in the private sector or nonprofit sector. And we're currently conducting a financial analysis and service analysis of those proposals. Regional center designation. We have submitted an application for that regional center designation. It did go to the Growth Management Policy Commission, and currently it's going to be reviewed by the PSRC by the end of 2014. So if there's any more specific questions on that, I'm going to rely on my expert, Trish Heinonen here, who may have some more information on where we are in the process. But the good news is we got the regional center designation application done, submitted, and we're probably halfway through this kind of 2-year approval process. Public lands inventory, that's been done by the staff. We actually have a map, and we anticipate that it'll be submitted to the Land and Shore Committee with some recommendations on potential parcels here by mid-year. You may recall what council had asked to do on this goal was identify all the city-owned property that was in the city and make kind of do a review as to whether or not it made sense for the city to continue to own it or if there's a potential repurposing of that property. We would come back to the council and provide some recommendations on that. What we found is the majority of the land that we own is either designated open space or utility or rights of way in the streets. I think there are a couple parcels that there may be some opportunities for, consideration, maybe affordable housing development or something along those lines. But the Land and Shore Committee will be able to look at that recommendation later this year. Enhance the Rainier Trail. This has been kind of an ongoing process, and unfortunately I can't tell you that I can put a check mark next to it and say it's done. I think it is an ongoing process. We have done in significantly enhanced police focus of the area, and our actual, I think, responses to that area have increased. Part of that conversation has been removing the skate park, and as we talked about earlier, we actually got funding that was put into the budget for that, and there's going to be a recommendation on moving that. And we also developed a partnership with the Issaquah Community Network, and they kind of put together kind of a Take Back the Trail program. So they've set up, Barbara D. Michelle was involved with that, and they set up kind of a walking program on a regular basis to just walk the trail and provide a more steadying influence and some eyes on some of the activity that was going on there. And they partnered with the police department. So if they saw something that was going on, they would contact the police department, let them know if they saw some activity that needed some additional focus. For financial information agenda bills, the current agenda bills do include financial information. I think the council focus on this was to try and make that financial information a little bit more uniform. And so one of the challenges that we've had is how they interrelate with some of the financial systems. And so there's going to be an agenda bill later this year for council to authorize the purchase of the new financial system, Munis, and that will go a long way to being able to upgrade the financial information provided to council on agenda bills or just in general. And that's it. Yes.
If I may. You mentioned earlier the overcrossing. That was actually a city goal. It wasn't specifically delineated on this list this evening, but there was a goal last year that was approved. It was the final one that we approved at the retreat. It survived the final round of cuts. And
So that's a 2014 goal?
that was a goal.
So this was our 2013 goal wrap-up.
But it was mentioned earlier in terms of the ongoing work. And I believe it's been a goal probably in 2010, 11, 12, 13, somewhere in those range of years. I guess my question is, when you mentioned about the intersections at Front and Gilman, Front and Sunset, I understand that Front and Gilman and the overcrossing to some extent require the IJR. And, you know, that has to be done at a state level, and our hands are a little tied until we get there. Front and Sunset, not necessarily. We've got the potential flashing yellow going in later this year, which will hopefully improve operations at that intersection. So I think we are doing something. But I guess beyond the IJR, is there anything as a city that we can be doing to improve those issues regarding mobility, whether it's the intersection at Front and Gilman, whether it's working towards getting an overcrossing, you know, or is it just we literally can't do anything, our hands are shackled until that IJR funds, those come through?
Well, so I think our engineer isn't here, but I think what he would probably say is that Front Street obviously acts as a bottleneck for regional traffic going through. And so right now there are really two entryway points into that, both on Sunset and Front, and then directly on to Front. So exit 18 and exit 17, and they interrelate. The IJR report will help influence, some of the recommendations on how we're able to go forward. The overcrossing will have a significant impact primarily on 900 was some of the initial analysis that we saw. The other alternative would be how do you get traffic that's bypassing Issaquah around this intersection over here. And so, and council had a long debate over that, kind of general bypass issue over the past. And so that would be, one of the challenges in terms of the design is how do you kind of move traffic out of that bottleneck, which is located there at Sunset and Front. So other than dealing with the IJR at this point, there's no, thinking, I think, about how you would kind of transition the traffic there, unless you can find some way to kind of get the traffic out of that intersection and past there.
So it's pretty much all the IJR.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Nina?
Thank you. I just had a small housekeeping comment on goal number 12. To be more accurate, the regional center, it's a regional growth center because there are other kinds of centers. Well, there's one other kind. So to clarify that would be more informative.
Thank you.
Thank
That
you.
was the intent. I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you. Anybody? Any other questions or comments for Bob? Okay, thank you, Bob.
Good evening, City Council. Keith Niven with your Economic Development Department. And I think where we're leading you this evening is kind of working our way from expenditures, revenues, to past goals, to kind of talking about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that were evaluated by the Economic Vitality Commission last year. And then eventually working our way towards emerging trends to kind of get you towards thinking about upcoming goal-setting sessions. So to remind you, the Economic Vitality Commission made a presentation to you last summer. It was a June COW where they talked about their SWOT analysis. And I thought I would go ahead and start with some current events, and that was this article that came out in the Times on the 24th. Boeing seeks East Side space for engineers. So that's a great story, and as your economic development director, I get inundated by emails, calls, and other things asking, this would be great if this located in Issaquah. Let's get that to happen. So What I would say to you is that we still have some issues to work through in terms of our economic profiling before bigger companies, I think, look at us on par with Bellevue, Redmond, and some of the other employment destinations. We'll get to that in a second. So that's my lead-in to going through kind of a recap of the SWOT analysis with you. And so what I'm going to do is just basically kind of read through these, and I'll try and do it quickly because I know we're trying to stay on schedule. So the threats are the internal and external forces with the potential to threaten our resources, opportunities, and values. And the threats that were identified by the Commission are resource limitations of capital, land, and workforce threaten the economic growth and stability of our community. Growing competition from neighboring communities threaten the strength of the existing job base. The changing and unpredictable regional and global economic influences threaten and challenge the city's revenue stability. Shifts towards living proximate to work threaten the city's demographic diversity. And if you guys want an explanation of any of these, I'd be glad to give you that. The loss of focus on flexible and future-oriented economic policies threaten achieving our vision. Shrinking regional transportation budgets threaten access and further business development. So now on to opportunities. And opportunities are our assets or circumstances that demonstrate a potential for growth or improvement. So the first one, Issaquah's strong education sector fosters vitality and attracts an influential demographic. The second one, the city's commitment to its economic prosperity by forming the Economic Development Department and the Economic Vitality Commission. The third, Issaquah benefits from our regional spin-offs from being part of a prosperous region. The fourth, Issaquah's character attracts the entrepreneurial and innovative demographic necessary for healthy economic development. Next, land use and economic development policy is a tool for attracting and maintaining businesses. The outdoor recreational amenities appeal to a growing Northwest demographic. And the growing arts and cultural district fosters a unique community asset. Next is weaknesses. Weaknesses are what puts us at a disadvantage relative to other communities. First one, mobility options are limited by geography, lack of funding, and state and city transportation and transit policies. Second, the undefined economic base limits employment opportunities. And that kind of strikes to, I think, what one of the two things here in this weaknesses list, I think, strike to why Boeing stopped their search at Eastgate. The next one, city economic maturity is in transition between youth and adulthood. The next one is the value proposition to locate a business in Issaquah has not been packaged and sold. So in other words, if you look at the second and fourth one under weaknesses, when we talked to the agent at CBRE, which was handling the site selection for Boeing, they basically said that Issaquah is too far east for them, and that really they were stopping their look along the I-90 corridor at Eastgate. And I think part of, and that is a story that we've heard a number of times from different site selectors. And you know, we can look at bookings.com, they landed in Eastgate. Basically, Issaquah in the region is still perceived as being out in the hinterland. And that's really kind of what was identified by the Commission under part of our weaknesses. And the last item under weaknesses, the high cost of living and doing business in Issaquah relative to the size of its market are disincentives to locate in town. And then last is strengths. Strengths are what we have that can be built upon or leveraged. First one, many in the community care and are involved in civic affairs. Second, regional transportation system provides a large capture area for jobs and retail sales. Third, Issaquah is a nice place to live. Fourth, the high concentration of talented and highly educated people. And last, Issaquah is at an inflection point with an opportunity to grow. So where that leads us is basically to a set of 6 economic policy considerations, and they are kind of categorized in these different categories. Transportation.
Excuse me, Keith?
Yes. Sorry.
Before you proceed, Tola, you have a question?
I did. What do you mean that we're at an inflection point?
I think if you think about it, Issaquah is at a place right now where, you know, if you think about what Redmond is Microsoft and Nintendo and, you know, all sorts of things. Bellevue is growing. Seattle has a certain image. Kirkland has a certain image. Issaquah right now, in terms of its economic base, is somewhat undefined. So we're at a point where we're kind of deciding to grow in a certain way, and we have the ability, and because we're kind of last to the table, I think we have opportunities that maybe others didn't have. They just kind of evolved in a certain way, and I think we can be more kind of thoughtful in how we want to grow our economic community. So we're at that point where I think we feel like, you know, we've been growing, we've had these kind of master plan communities over the past 10 to 15 years that have just kind of exploded, and we've just approved a sub-area plan for Central Issaquah, and, you know, we've got kind of all this stuff that's just about to happen, but it's just about to happen. It hasn't happened yet, and so we're at that point where it feels like we're about to step onto the next ledge.
So before you continue, could you go back one slide?
I can.
Thank you. So this is, the wording on this is slightly different. I was trying to rationalize it with an earlier version that I have. One of the areas it says up there, so I have a couple questions about some of these. Threat, second from the end. The loss of focus on flexible and future-oriented economic policies threatens achieving our vision. Could you give me a couple examples?
Sure. So there was a lot of concern. I think when the SWAT was being done, it was right on the heels of the Central Issaquah plan getting adopted. And I think there was a feeling that the council bought into a vision. It was a long-term vision, and it was a very progressive vision for this community. And I think the concern here was that you have to kind of stick to that if you want to see it through to kind of what's perceived to be a prosperous end. And I think the concern was kind of losing that focus over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years in the short term, when maybe we're not seeing a lot of progress in change for the Central Issaquah plan area. Yes?
Okay, so that was a forward-looking fear of loss of focus.
I think so. That's my recollection, and I'll ask Matt if he remembers anything other than that potentially for that one. Okay, so we're going to go with that for now.
Okay. And the under weaknesses.
Yes.
Your second one, you addressed it, but I'm still unclear. The undefined economic base. Now, when you gave examples of the other areas, you named businesses that were there. So we can name businesses. So I don't quite, I don't know what an undefined economic base, because then your explanation was about identity and the perception of people from the outside.
So part of it is, as Bob mentioned earlier, talking about the IPZs. So right now, so I'm going to use Redmond as an example. Redmond is known as having a very strong kind of high-tech base. And so they market and they seek out companies that do business with Microsoft, that maybe have a relationship to DigiPen. There's a number of companies that locate in Microsoft because of that perceived strength of high tech. And similar to Bothell, Bothell is Philips, it's all the kind of medical hardware equipment that also do work for Boeing, and they've actually found, and that's why they located in Bothell, is because they're the same manufacturers who do things for Boeing can also do things for healthcare. And so what we have in our community, clearly we have Costco, clearly we have Swedish as a major employer, we have a lot of retailers, we have a lot of very small niche businesses, but we don't really have a defined kind of base where if you were, one of the comments, so about a year and a half ago, Brooks moved their headquarters for their company I think it was from Bothell to Seattle, or they basically moved internal to the region. And somebody said, well, why didn't we go after Brooks? Wouldn't it have been great if Brooks's headquarters would have been in Issaquah? And okay, maybe that's great, maybe it's not great. You know, the question is if we perceive ourselves as having an economic base that relies on maybe outdoor recreation, and that's one of the things that we think we probably have a propensity for just because of our location, well then yes, it would be great if Brooks, or if we could get, you know, REI to move from Kent here. That's not going to happen. But, you know, those are the kind of things that I think you can start to work on if you've defined kind of what you want to focus your economic base on. And right now, I think we're undefined.
Okay, so you're not saying it's just waiting to be captured because someone needs to look at it. I mean, just in terms of industry sectors and their relative density here, there isn't an ecosystem around, like you mentioned, high tech that may exist in Redmond. So, I mean, it's just that. And okay, so that identity of, you know, software, high tech, Redmond, because of the ecosystem and the focus on that industry segment, that doesn't exist here. It's not just a matter of us defining what's here. So that, I get that.
Okay.
And one other thing, in the, let me look at this again. In this version, I think a very important strength that I don't see in here is strong education system. So I'm not sure, it looks like the words maybe got smithed a little bit, but this earlier version you had given me, just one of the bullet points is strong education system, and I took that as a reference to our school district, right? So
Absolutely.
as we continue to,
And right now it's listed as an opportunity. So we see it as being.
that was in a strength before, okay?
Yes.
Okay, so is that a reference, do you think, both to the school district and or
Bellevue College.
Bellevue College? All right, thank you. Nina?
Thank you. And thanks for that discussion about the defined economic base, because I was wondering about that too. And to contribute to the conversation, I can see where having a strong brand, say an outdoor industry, could also feed to our tourism industry. But we also may benefit from having a diversity in our economic base rather than being all into one basket. I wanted to ask about the number 4 on threats, where you paused and said, ask questions if you don't know. And I actually didn't know what you meant by shifting living proximate to work threatening the demographic diversity.
So this one relates to, so as the baby boomers are aging, and the next generation and the generation after that are showing some differences in living preferences. Not only changes in their desire to maybe drive as soon as they possibly can, but also, you know, desires to live in more urban settings. To give you an example, when we were talking with Microsoft about the land that they bought in Issaquah back in 2000, you know, their vision for developing was basically the same as it was at the time in Redmond, which is, you know, we want to build a campus that's 4-story buildings, that's very suburban. We're taking kids out of college and putting them directly into a business, and we want that setting for them. Well, flash forward, you know, a decade, and now where Microsoft is locating is in much more urban settings in downtown Bellevue, downtown Seattle. You can look at the entire, you know, Amazon complex at South Lake Union. The young professionals are seeking more urban experiences for their, not only where they want to live, but where they want to work. And so what this is saying is that if indeed there is a larger sector of our populace that's wanting to live in more urban locations, that if we stay the way we are today, which is much more of a suburban community, then we may lose out on a large portion of the population which would choose Belltown or downtown Bellevue or some other location over Issaquah in terms of a place to live. That's what that's kind of referring to.
Thank you.
Okay, so last slide. Maybe. Okay, so at the end of the day, I think where all this heads is there's really kind of 6 categories of kind of economic policy considerations for us to think about. Transportation infrastructure, workforce, retention incentives, arts, culture, environment, and entertainment, city administration, and attraction and marketing. And with that, I'm going to say I'm done. Sorry about that.
Well,
Yes.
hold on. I so appreciate your sensitivity to the clock, but could you give me a little bit more about what you just said?
Sure. So if you take the work that was done with the SWOT and all the things on the previous slide, you can basically now organize them into these 6 categories. And I think each of these categories has a very kind of serious implication on our economic future. And so I think that's what this is beginning to do. This is the next step for the Economic Vitality Commission as they work through setting goals for the strategic plan that they're working on. So basically, this set of 6 kind of categories is now becoming then an organizing principle for what goals and strategies would come out of their strategic planning efforts. So this is, and I think what this will do is be kind of some seeds for the conversation that Bob's going to have with you next in terms of kind of the emerging issues. Some of them are here, and some of them, because this is really just the economic leg of the stool, there are some that are, in other places.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Keith? Thanks, Keith. Nice segue, Bob. Thank you very much. Now,
So this is pretty broad. It's going to be like this picture over here, 10,000 feet. Now, there may be some things that we talk about in this presentation tonight that you want to spend a little more time on or go and delve into a little bit further. And there's lots of time and opportunity that we'll be able to talk about some of these things in broader detail and kind of what they mean. But we did want to just kind of lay out some of the very conceptual items. Some of these are, you'll see, are very challenging, like climate change. I mean, that's a global issue that has some local impacts, and we are working we have a very diligent carbon footprint reduction plan. But are we going to solve climate change, doing our little part? Probably not, but we can certainly contribute, and it's going to have impacts to our community. So you'll see that as we kind of go through this presentation. So, sorry, I got to stand by the microphone. First off is financial sustainability, as you saw in the quarterly report, year-end report that our finance director just did. The city has a lot of economic strengths. We have a broad and diverse tax base. We have solid revenues that are coming in. We've continued to maintain and control our expenditures. However, we continue to have future anticipated expenses that we're going to have that we need to anticipate into the future. So if you start to look at issues like the Highlands or Talus, that infrastructure is approximately 15 years old now. And so as we kind of go forward, we need to have a plan in place to be able to fund the maintenance, the future maintenance and replacement of the infrastructure that got built in that area. In terms of our operating budget, we've got to be cognizant of what mandates come and have an impact upon the city. So, for example, the city used to receive sales tax revenues on every sale that happened out of Costco.com because we were the nexus point for that. When they changed the sales tax law, we essentially lost about $1 million a year in revenue because of the way that the law changed, and it got replaced by sales tax mitigation, but it still didn't, take the place of the full impact of that change in the law. And most recently, there was a law passed by Congress, which is essentially the Internet Fairness Act. And if that ends up replacing the state sales tax mitigation, that will get reduced even further by about $500,000 a year in terms of what we receive from internet sales within the community relative to sales tax mitigation. So when you start to look at challenges that we're receiving in terms of federal and state mandates, municipalities and cities, we are going to be facing some long-term challenges in the budget. One of the great strengths that we have, though, is the diversity of our tax base. So we did talk about the fact we don't necessarily have a mothership, here that we can point to. Being diverse we have a very strong retail sector, and being diverse in terms of the types of businesses that we have helps to minimize, to some extent, the volatility that we see in certain budgets. So, if we were a community that was, say, completely reliant upon residential houses, and you saw a drop in property values there, that impact is going to be felt on the individuals who live, the homeowners in that community. So it's one of the strengths that we have, too. Oops, went the wrong way. In terms of capital facilities, there's several items that have taken place over the years or are in the planning stages. This building, for example, was the police station, and the second floor of that got captured for a portion of the city hall. But the police department, if you go downstairs, you'll see they're kind of burgeoning at the seams, and they're ready to grow up into that second floor. That has some impact on the office workers that are located up on the second floor of that facility. We have a master site plan that got adopted, which essentially plans that the Parks and Recreation Facility Shop has to be moved because it's going to be redeveloped as a park. And so there's an impact and future impact on how we finance and how we make that part of the master site plan come true. There's this facility, our IT infrastructure that's located in this facility is probably not as secure as we would like it to be, and provide some of the redundancy that we would like it to provide. And so as we start to look at, how this building fits in with the overall plan, there's really a need overall for, a kind of a general capital facilities plan and how that interrelates to future investments that the city's going to make overall in the community. East Side Fire and Rescue. As you know, we just adopted an ILA last year. We're continuing for another 7 years with our surrounding 5 communities. But there's challenges underlying the partnership. One of those is our community has seen an increase over the last 3.5 years, 4 years of nearly $1 million. Our increase next year in overall contributions is going up by about $500,000. And that's just by virtue of how District 10 ended up relocating their fire station to May Valley Road and the redistribution of assessed valuation within the service areas that each station serves. So, long term, we can't continue to afford $500,000 increases on an annual basis, or a couple years ago, a $250,000 increase in that. It starts to impact and eat away at some of our other services. We will soon be approaching a point in the long term, if you see the trend line continuing that way, that our property tax rate will essentially be eaten up by paying the fire service. So that means all of our other services essentially in the city are going to have to be financed by sales taxes or other revenue sources. The other challenge that we have here is we're not the sole entity that controls the budget. We're one of 5 partners that are within that area. 2 of those partners, District 38 and District 10, are facing some challenges, financial challenges. They're looking at creating a regional fire authority. As district, that's also, some impact in terms of the future financial viability of that department. And as we went through and did that analysis last year, when Sammamish raised this issue of whether, and other communities raised this issue of continuation of the ILA, and we did an evaluation of our services that we were able to provide independently as a city, we found that while every area in the city is able to be served within our level of service measures, there were probably a desire, particularly in the Providence Point area, to provide a slightly higher level of service on medic runs that are currently provided out of the Klahani station, that we would prefer to perhaps provide a slightly higher level of service. So we were looking at options and opportunities if the Providence Point was no longer served out of the Klahani station, and what that service level would start to look at. So we do have 7 years in terms of what the existing ILA is. The question is, what happens in 7 years? And so we'll, over the next 7-year basis, we're going to have to continue to do evaluation of how we provide service in the community and whether or not our existing station locations, bases, and service methods on fire and EMS continue to make sense or not. The Central Issaquah Plan, as you can see, it was adopted December 17th, 2012, became effective April 29th, 2013, and so as we approach a year, you know, we've got some questions. It's time to take a measure of where we are and how effective some of the concepts were. We've been able to market test some of the plans over the past year and see whether or not, you know, what we put in as a conceptual basis or recommended basis on some of the analysis that we received. You know, we've had the opportunity to kind of market test that for a year and understand what's going on regionally. And so, you know, we want to continue to evaluate the Central Issaquah Plan and our marketing efforts and understand what's happening in the greater region. So a lot of the Central Issaquah Plan, not only does it include residences, but also includes office space. So understanding what you heard in the earlier presentation from our economic development director is, you know, what is the attractiveness and continued potential redevelopment of office space in our community, and as that relates to the Central Issaquah Plan. So those are one of the larger issues as we continue to work through that. I know the council's talked a lot about this over the last few years, is what is our level of regional influence, and what, as we continue to define what we are as a community, and we've continued to grow from a small community of 5,000 people to a community that's approaching 35,000 people, you know, what role do we want to play regionally with our efforts? What's our relationship and our partnerships going to be with our neighboring communities? You know, the Urban Regional Growth Center designation is a big part of that, and that's a defined status that we've been seeking on a regional basis. It's going to be important to future funding and grants that we'll receive. So overall regional influence is going to be important. And one of the things that the council did a couple of years ago was hire the lobbyist, and we're starting to see real impacts down in Olympia now by the result of the fact that we got a voice there, and the council's adopted a legislative agenda over the past couple of years, and we've actually had some real movement in accomplishing some of the goals that we had in our legislative agenda. Light rail. As we know, and was presented at the council meeting last month, when light rail opens in 2023, it's going to have an impact on metro bus, you know, regional bus service within the city, and how people are going to be interacting with the metro system. But most importantly is that light rail has been has shown on a regular basis to have a very significant economic impact on communities. So we're already seeing in the Bell Red corridor and certain areas of Redmond that are going to have light rail stations, that property development, property acquisitions, and the redevelopment of those properties in a very significant way are starting to occur. And you know, what that means to our economic competitiveness in this region, what that means for future jobs and growth in our region, and how that interrelates with the Central Issaquah Plan are all very important as we continue to focus on this. While, you know, 2023 is a long way off, you know, I think we as a community need to continue to take steps to make sure that we remain viable from a transportation mobility standpoint, and that we continue to fit in with the greater region as we're looking at this. And so I-90 has a big part in this overall concept too. So we talked about this a little earlier. We probably don't even have to show you a picture. It's probably burned fresh in your minds what Front Street looks like at times. And so regional mobility is a concern. You know, we have, one of the challenges we have is our geography. It's one of the real strengths that we have too, but we're a pinch point going through, you know, Tiger and Squawk and Cougar Mountains. And so we're still seeing continued growth. Imagine what happens when Black Diamond, if that project ever gets off the ground and we add, you know, 5,000 or 6,000 residences to that potential corridor and that traffic gets dumped on Issaquah Hobart Road. What's the impact going to be on our, you know, the regional impact of regional traffic on our local community? And it's not completely fair for our community to bear the full brunt of regional traffic, but by virtue of the fact of geography and the fact that I-90 runs through the middle of our community, it does have an impact. And so there are opportunities, I think, to work at the state level, to work at the county level, and to frankly work with some of our neighboring communities that have an impact on our regional traffic as well. You know, the reality is growth is coming. By 2040, some of the projections in the general region show that we're anticipating 1.3 million new people, not in our community, but regionally, to come to the greater King County region. That includes 985,000 new jobs and 607,000 new households that'll be coming to this area. And so we need strong freight mobility, jobs, and the impact of international commerce, and you know, the real strength that we have of being kind of a gateway to the Pacific and Asia is going to continue to become more and more important. And you're seeing those issues play out in certain parts of the state that they're looking at, you know, how they're going to transport coal to, you know, outside of the, you know, the general region. Some of those mobility issues are going to be issues that we'll be dealing with locally. Affordable housing. Housing costs, even with the Great Recession that we saw from 2007 to 2010, has still increased an average of 20% between 2004 and 2013. As some of you may recall, Arthur Sullivan did his presentation on the Central Issaquah plan, and and he's a director of Arch, and what he indicated is the numbers that he is seeing now in terms of overall growth on the east side of the cost of housing is comparable to what was happening when the tech sector was developing in the Bay Area. And so we're starting to see those types of growth rates and average values of homes in our community and on the east side. So, but you look at some of the jobs that we have here, you know, we have a very strong retail base, but a lot of those jobs aren't necessarily paying at the level that is necessary to be able to afford a single-family home. So the question is, you know, what does affordable housing look like? Does it remain a value? And Issaquah has been a leader in affordable housing, not only in the state, but frankly on a national basis. As of 2011, 5% of our housing stock was low-income housing, essentially below the 50% threshold identified by Community Development Block Grant, and 12.8% was moderate income housing at 50 to 80%. In our comprehensive plan, our goal is to have 24% of our housing stock to be low-income housing and 17% to be moderate income housing. So when you measure what our planning goal is relative to what our, you know, the actual outcomes to date, we're seeing a gap within that. Also, we're seeing a real severe cost burden increase in rents to people who live in our community. Essentially, the cost burden, so that's defined as those who pay more than 50% of their income towards housing. That rose from 13% in 2000 to 21% in 2010. So that's continuing to be kind of a general issue, I think, on the east side. Lastly, married couple families with children as a defined household type in our community, and I think it, you know, comes back to what Council President Winterstein said. We have one of our strongest assets is our school system, and so people, when they have children, want to move to our community, and so there's a definite impact that has both in our schools and our community. But it also has an impact, one of the questions we talk about is the 20-somethings, 20-year-olds. Is this an attractive place for them to live and work or not? Are we, defining our residents by virtue of their, the school age of their children and whether they continue to live here, in the long term or not? Technology infrastructure. Again, this is one of those things that I think we're seeing trends on a national basis. There's this whole concept that has been talked about for a long time, but I think it's becoming more and more a reality. This aspect of the Internet of Things. So your toasters, your refrigerators, your heating and air conditioning controls will all be connected to the internet. We'll all have the ability to make changes in energy usage and in electricity usage on their own. And so that begs the question, do we have the infrastructure in place to be able to manage, the future? And there's a later slide that talks about the fact that some of that's out of our control. A lot of that is provided by private utilities. The other aspect is, what are people's expectations? My 4-year-old knows how to use my internet, my iPhone, which is amazing. And so imagine in 15 years what it's going to be like for her, what her expectations of what a community is, and what those expectations of the children of today are going to be facing down the road and in the future. And, do we have the technology infrastructure, or are we going to be able to afford to make the investments in the technology infrastructure in our community to be able to accommodate that? And frankly, it's going to become a level of competition and competitiveness issue for those communities that can afford to make that investment versus those communities that can't. And lastly, on this issue is how are we providing services to our residents that are very tech savvy nowadays? So, just to give you a very basic one, utility payments can't be made online. I mean, most of us do our banking online nowadays, and so we can't, in our financial system that we currently have, or maybe it's just a policy, we don't allow that. And it's one of the biggest complaints I think that we hear from our customers is, I can't even make a, utility payment online. I'd like to be able to do that, or in some cases, even pay with a credit card. So, we got to make sure our financial policies and our infrastructure that we have can meet the needs of the future and, frankly, the needs of today. I think one of the greatest assets that we have in our community that we've seen is the amount of diversity that's developed in our community. So, but there's also some challenges here, too. The 20 to 64-year-old age group is decreasing. Even though we talked about earlier, people come here for the schools, but that same rate of the over 64 age group is increasing. And that change has been about 3% in each group. But the challenge we're going to face is just as a society, we're continuing to live longer and we're continuing to age. And so that starts to have impacts on our zoning code, the infrastructure that we have in place. I can remember a budget meeting where Councilmember Scher brought up this law where we were going to have to change out all of our street signs to make them large face type. And the cost to do that was, if I remember, it was close to $500,000 just to change out all of the street signs within the city to meet the new federal standards. So there are real impacts as we start to think about, people aging in place. Do we have the public facilities and the public infrastructure necessary to support those individuals to do that? We have a very diverse population. Approximately 20.4% of our population is foreign-born, and 21.6% of households speak a language other than English at home. I remember I went to International Day at my son's school, and which is in the Issaquah school district, and there were over 27 different nationalities that were represented at that school, that elementary school. Just absolutely amazing, the amount of diversity that we have. On the other hand, we still have a real demand for services from families in need, and that's increasing. And human services has been Commission has been kind of reporting that out to us. And there was the challenge that started with Mayor Freisinger and has continued with Mayor Butler, that we increase our funding for human services to a $10 per capita level. And we're still working on that challenge. I think we're at $9 this year. But to give you an example of one of our nonprofit partners, the Issaquah Food Bank served 15,742 families in 2012, which was an increase of approximately 10.7% over the previous year. So as we're still seeing impacts at the federal level when they're cutting food stamps and seeing some continued reductions in the social safety net, again, where do those people live? They live in our town and other people's towns, and so the impact of those federal decisions are being felt on a local basis. Jobs. So we tackled this head on with the creation of an economic development department and creation of an economic vitality commission. And we are continuing to find and strive for a balance of jobs and housing and what that should look like within the community. This is one of the best assets that we have that got created here. It is and it will continue to be an economic driver for our community, and the potential jobs and that will come from that, and future innovation, and the impact of, as we continue to get more office development and new business starts, this is a big part of our future. You know, the fact that we're looking at developing, doing a development agreement with Costco, and they're retaining their corporate headquarters and doing a very significant potential expansion in our community, again, just in conversation standpoint, bodes well for our future economic health. One of the concerns would be full reliance upon the residential homeowners or taxpayers on a community, so that economic, providing jobs for those individuals and partnership with the private sector, and then providing tax base for our community, so it's not purely reliant upon the individual homeowner, is very important. I talked a little bit about this, and I think we've been one of the worldwide leaders, frankly, in our sustainability efforts. But we're going to see impact on water resources, on global temperature, in coastal areas, human health. We're seeing migrations of diseases that are showing up in places that have never shown up before, because now the weather is warm enough for those, bacteria or insects or parasites to actually survive up in colder weather climates. And so those impacts are going to continue to have future impacts on us as a region and as a community. And so we've got to be cognizant of that and own that piece of it that is local in focus. We are heavily dependent upon private utilities to provide certain basic infrastructure services to our community. Electric and gas, we've heard kind of anecdotal reports from some of our businesses in the community that there's some unreliability of the electric power. Some of you who may own generators at home because you've experienced gaps in your electricity service may testify to that. But we're working with Puget Sound Energy to make sure that future investment that we're seeing in the electric infrastructure remains a focus as they look at making regional investments in their whole electrical grid. We talked a little bit about broadband service and making sure our telecommunication and fiber optic systems and wireless connectivity remain consistent with what people expect in the 21st century. That at 10,000 feet is it. It's a broad list. Is it, something that, we got into very specifics about? No, but I think any of these could be a conversation at a cow at some point. We go into a lot more of the data and the potential policy impacts of these items.
Any questions or comments for Bob? So I want to thank you, and we specifically requested that the council hear what's on the administration's mind about emerging issues. So as we're forming our goals for our upcoming, selection of next year's goals. I think this is a good package of information for us to consider. Thank you, Bob. Thanks for putting that together. And next time, we're going to limit you to 5 items.
It was a long list, and we pared that one down, so it was a challenge.